The God Valley Incident, the Clash of Legends, names carved into history, a battle where a legend vanished and a hero was born, the untold chapter in the story of the rise of the future Pirate King. And now, the God Valley Incident, the most hyped up war in the entire series. Turns out it was all about one woman? What the hell is going on? Chapter 1157 of One Piece is bonkers because it seems like Oda might be setting up his own take on the Trojan War, with none other than Shakky playing the role of Helen of Troy. At least that's what it seems to be pointing towards. This chapter revealed that after opening a bar at Hachinosu, Shakky became the apple of the eye of the Rocks Pirates. She was even called the Treasure of Hachinosu, an extremely important title which we will circle back to in just a moment. But let's just think about that for a second. Even the legendary crew of Rocks, led by a man with a clear and brutal plan, a crew that included the likes of Whitebeard, they all fell under Shakky's charm. In fact, they were acting almost like the Roger Pirates did, perhaps even more simpy because they didn't have a stoic Rayleigh. Absolute madness. And then, if this all leads to Shakky being the reason the God Valley incident turned out the way that it did, that is the wildest twist I did not see coming. But before we delve into what all of this means, please subscribe to the channel. In the words of our forever goddess, Shakky herself, I'd be so happy to see you. In all seriousness, we are almost at 100,000 subscribers here at the JoyFleet, and we're always looking for more fellow One Piece fans to share our obsession with. Let's rewind back to chapter 1156, because we were introduced to the idols of the One Piece world, the Kuja Pirates, in a flashback, and back then it did seem a little random, definitely unexpected that they were getting so much screen time in a flashback that was supposed to be centered around Loki, which admittedly has instead turned out to be a flashback, a very welcome flashback on Rocks. But now that focus on the Kuja Pirates makes perfect sense. The goddesses of Amazon Lily are involved in this flashback for a reason, a very important reason. And chapter 1156 did end with the narrator stating that Shakky, when she took on the mantle of Empress, her popularity reached heights never seen before. And given how famously dangerous the beauty of the Kuja Empress is, that line hits way differently now. Because here is where it gets crazy. If Shakky is really the treasure, the crown jewel of Hachinosu, then it seems that Oda may be implying something here. Oda seems to imply that Shakky was at the center of Goon Valley. Sorry, what did I say? God Valley. Shakky was the focus of the God Valley incident. Because if we go back to chapter 1096, when Garp was first called to God Valley, we see that he refused until Roger's name was mentioned. But what really stands out now in Garp's dialogue is this line. That was the treasure from Pirate Island. Of course they'll come back to get it. And back then it seemed like maybe Hachinosu had a legendary devil fruit, one of the devil fruits being offered up as a prize for the native hunting competition. Or maybe it was just some great bounty of gold. I mean, after all, very recently in chapter 1155 it was mentioned that Hachinosu was the home to a very large gold deposit. But now, after this chapter, after chapter 1157 narrating that Shakky might have been known as the Pirate Island's treasure. Under this lens, treasure might not have referred to gold or a devil fruit at all. It seems that that treasure was Shakky, and Shakky herself may have been taken to God Valley by the Celestial Dragons, and the Rocks Pirates involved themselves at God Valley to go back and reclaim her. So I think this actually calls us to re-examine chapter 1096 entirely under this new lens. So many lines seem to have a completely different meaning now. For example, when the Rocks Pirates arrive, everyone seems to be fighting for the treasure. Rocks himself charged ahead with Whitebeard shouting after him, "Not so fast, Rocks, who said I was your follower too?" And that takes on a whole new meaning if both Rocks and Whitebeard were after Shakky. After all, we do see in chapter 1157 that even Whitebeard was unable to withstand the beauty of Shakky despite being unfazed by Stussy. And then there's the argument between Stussy and Gloriosa. Stussy is disappointed disappointed in Whitebeard's reaction. She says, "Oh, Newgate, not you too," which could be implying that Whitebeard, whom Stussy seems to have some unrequited feelings towards, she sees that he is now also chasing after Shakky, to which Gloriosa chastises her, "Don't be so pathetic," and then Stussy responds, "Same to you, Gloriosa, like you can talk." And I know that this bickering was also Oda showing us that this pirate crew was far from harmonious, which is exactly what we've been told about the Rocks pirates. But now it makes even more sense if this bickering centered around Shakky and all the attention that she was receiving. This attention that was causing jealousy among some of the other women, and maybe Gloriosa defending her former second in command. And then we could even take a look at Big Mom's line. So Linlin exclaims that they'll all be mine, to which Kaido responds, "But you can't even do anything with them." And look, to be honest, I do think that Linlin was probably talking about the devil fruits. She is talking in plural form after all and not the singular. She doesn't say she'll be mine. And we do know for a fact that devil fruits were indeed being offered up as prizes at God Valley. In which case, Kaido would be questioning why Linlin would be chasing after the devil fruits when she has one already, so she can't consume another devil fruit. That is the much more straightforward interpretation. But it is also very well possible to read these lines under a completely new lens with Shakky in mind, because Kaido may have been saying that there is no point in Big Mom going after Shakky since she is also a woman. Because hey, we know that Big Mom is a lover of love, or at least the physical part of it, and a woman with a big appetite with many fathers to various children. Who's to say that she wasn't a progressive queen who played for both sides? And while I do think that it is more likely that Linlin was going after the devil fruits herself, I do find her next line quite intriguing. She says, "Let's just steal what we are after and then scram. All these dreamers with their heads in the clouds." And now this time, this line does seem to be a reference to Shakky. It seems to be a jab at all the men, all the foolish men who seem to foolishly believe that they have a real shot with Shakky. And then let's take a look at the Roger pirates. So when Roger arrives, he says, "It's been a whole year. Do you have any idea how I felt all this time?" And that part, how I felt, that hits harder when we know that Roger did in fact have feelings for Shakky, as we saw in the previous chapter, because we already know that he wanted her in his crew for himself, despite Roger himself already being admired by the former Empress Gloriosa. Gaban then tells Roger that there are no special privileges just because he's captain. And that seems to line up with the idea that everyone here at God Valley seems to assume whoever rescues Shakky, whoever gets to her first is going to win her heart. It goes back to those fanciful dreamers that Linlin was talking about only a few panels ago. And then the only one unfazed amidst all of this, Rayleigh. This is going to be a wild one. That's what he says. And that line by Rayleigh, after seeing his reactions in chapter 1156, I think it's very fair to assume that he wasn't just talking about the war, about the battle, but probably more so about the chaos and keeping the crew under control due to their infatuation with Shakky. And so then to think that Rayleigh, the calm Chad that he is, he's the one that would eventually become Shakky's husband, in which case maybe it really is the case that Rayleigh is the one that rescued Shakky and ended up winning her heart, meaning that all the other pirates were right after all, it's just that Rayleigh got there first. But then seeing as Shakky had already left the Kuja pirates at this point, I actually think that means Shakky had fallen in love with someone. That's why she had to leave Amazon Lily so that she wouldn't succumb to love sickness, and who knows, maybe that man could have been Rayleigh all along, Rayleigh as the only one unaffected by her beauty. In any case, if this is all true, and if this was all about Shakky, then I think it's even funnier that Garp didn't want to get involved at God Valley. Because I think the evidence points to Garp not being swayed by Shakky at all, especially since in chapter 1156 we saw that the Kuja pirates ran. They tried to escape as soon as Garp arrived, and unlike all the other pirates who were going nonsensical, who were swooning over the Kuja beauties, Garp had one sole focus in mind: capturing Roger. And Shakky herself did say that Garp used to chase her around the Grand Line, which did sound like at the time that he was trying to pursue her and capture her because she was a pirate rather than following her around as a suitor. And I think chapters 1156 and 1096 all support that, which then is very much what we know of the Monkey D family. No simps. Well, actually, maybe that excludes Dragon, because if you've watched my recent video, you'll know that I think Dragon may have had a relationship with Tritoma, and that Tritoma is Luffy's mother. But I digress. The point is, the entire God Valley incident may have happened for Shakky, literally the face that launched 1,000 ships. Or maybe actually more fitting here, the face that launched 1,000 simps. Because these legendary pirates, they were all simping over one woman. And it's not confirmed yet, but this does seem to be the direction that Oda is taking us on. And if it is, then once again, Oda has flipped the story in a way that no one saw coming. And I just can't get over how brilliantly One Piece that is. This is so ridiculous, so goofy, so unexpected, just genius. But actually, I do have to take that last part back, not about it being genius because I stand by that, but the fact that it was unexpected. Now, for me, it was definitely unexpected, but apparently it's not as unexpected or unpredictable as I thought, because I was talking about this absolute insanity with a friend of mine, and they told me that there was actually someone who did predict this, who did see this coming. A certain PM_me_your_so, who posted on Reddit on the 9th of August, and they theorized that the crown jewel of Hachinosu, that the grand prize of God Valley, was none other than Shakky. That is a crazy level of advanced observation haki, so all props to you, because when I went back to reread those panels that they focused on, Shakky's words have so much more meaning. When she claims that she will never submit to captivity, a dark foreshadowing that she would indeed actually be held captive. And I know that not everything in this theory turned out to be true. For example, they talked about Rocks winning Shakky as part of some sort of Davy back fight, but even still, this Redditor caught so many details. They predicted what I really thought was unpredictable. And I guess in hindsight, this idea that the single act of taking Shakky, that could escalate into one of the most legendary battles in One Piece history, that is exactly the kind of twist that Oda would pull. Just like the Trojan War, which is remembered for the gods, the heroes, the legendary epic battles. It all started over just one woman. But then, immediately I start wondering, who would then play the role of Paris in taking Shakky? Because my bet would be on Garling, or possibly even Saint Saturn. In case you're not familiar with the legend of Troy, in Greek mythology, Paris was the prince of Troy who was chosen to judge which goddess was the most beautiful. Paris ends up choosing Aphrodite, who, as a reward, promises him the love of the most beautiful woman on earth, which happens to be Helen. But the problem was, Helen was already married to King Menelaus of Sparta, but Paris went ahead and stole her from him anyways, taking her back to Troy. Some versions say he seduced her, others say that it was kidnapped. Either way, it was this act that sparked the legendary Trojan War. And so in One Piece, in this God Valley scenario, if Shakky is the Helen figure, then who is the Paris that stole her from Hachinosu and took her to God Valley? That's the spark, that's the catalyst. That was the act that made every single pirate and every marine converge on this same island. Because now the Rocks pirates want their treasure back, the Roger pirates want to claim Shakky for themselves, and Garp as a result is just thrown into the mix. So for me, Saint Figureland Garling as a critical core figure in this final saga is very compelling, but then also knowing the history of Ginny and Saint Saturn, and how Ginny was also kidnapped by the Celestial Dragons, and then Saint Saturn conducting experimentations on Ginny, I do wonder whether Shakky was facing some sort of similar threat. Perhaps the world government had a much darker, a much more sinister plan with Shakky, the former empress of the Kuja warriors, especially based on the interaction between Garp and Kong in chapter 1096. It seems like it was supposed to be a secret that the world government took Shakky. Otherwise, it may have just been on the whim of a celestial dragon, someone like Saint Roswald, for example. The greedy scum of a man just wanted the most beautiful woman in the world for himself, unaware of the consequences this would have on the entire world. Which is also just so fitting of the celestial dragons in general, doing whatever they want, whenever they want, without a care for the broader implications. Explaining why Garp was so initially uninterested in God Valley, and also explaining why Loki may hate the celestial dragon so much if he is aware in their role in sparking the whole God Valley incident, which is where Rox would eventually die, so their actions of stealing Shakky being the catalyst for Rox's eventual death, thereby earning Loki's intense hatred. And what I really love about all of this is the subtle message, or maybe the not so subtle message, that Oda seems to be sending. Love is not a weakness. Recognizing and admiring the beauty and the charm of a woman is not antithetical to being a hero or to being a legend. And it's hard not to make the connections to Sanji, who is and always has been our resident simp. And Sanji has copped a lot of flack over the years for his weaknesses when it comes to women. And look, even I will admit that he takes it too far sometimes, because there is a fine line between love and respect and just plain creepy, and Oda does toe that line very dangerously at times. But overall, I have always viewed Sanji's love for women as not a weakness, but as one of his strengths, and it's not a quality that should make fans dismissive of Sanji. And in more recent years of Luffy and Zoro awakening or further mastering their Conqueror's Haki, with no clear signs yet of Sanji also unlocking his Conqueror's Haki, I have seen people claim that it's because he's a simp. Simps can't be conquerors. Whereas now, if this is not Oda definitively refuting that claim, I don't know if we're reading the same series. And I do actually think that this is something that Oda had been nudging us towards from earlier on in the Elbaf arc. You know, with our formal introduction to Gaban, the self-professed minister or preacher of love. No one can dispute the fact that Scopper is a legendary monster. He himself might identify as a man of love, but others regard him as the goddamn mountain eater. A man who was on par with Dark King Rayleigh and even the Pirate King himself. So I can't wait to see all the implications of all this simpy glory for Sanji, not just in series, but also how it's going to change the fan base. I also can't wait to see Loki's reaction to when this flashback is over, because this is supposed to be his flashback, but we've gone so far back in time that he's actually barely in it. And if Gaban is the one telling this story from his perspective, it's going to be hilarious to see Loki's face if he finds out that his hero's downfall, if Rox's death wasn't some part of an epic battle, but rather the result of simping after a woman. That's gonna be classic. And look, there is actually so much more that happened in chapter 1157, but I had to get these initial thoughts off my chest first. But don't you worry, because I will discuss all of my various other thoughts on this incredibly packed chapter. And if you have thoughts of your own that you would like to share, then please let me know by leaving a comment below. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on my further thoughts on chapter 1157, as well as so many other things in One Piece that we have to discuss, which is good timing because we have one more break coming our way. But don't you worry, because I will fill that One Piece shaped hole in your heart. So subscribe, like, and share the video. You can also become a Patreon or channel member like these wonderful people if you'd like to help support the channel further. But as always, thank you for listening to another one of my crazy ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.